All right, ready to dive into some history?
Always.
Well, today we're looking at a book that might just turn everything you thought you knew about the past upside down.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
We're talking about Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire, written back in 1926 by Drusilla Dunjee Houston.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the gist?
Basically, she's making the case for this massive,
Yeah.
powerful empire that nobody really talks about, the Cushite Empire. And get this, she's saying it spanned continents and shaped civilizations from Egypt all the way to India.
Wow, that's a bold claim. Most history books barely even mention the Cushites.
Exactly. She's basically saying they were the real pioneers, laying the foundation for all these advancements we usually attribute to other cultures, agriculture, animal domestication, you name it. She's suggesting they were mastering this stuff way before some of the big names in ancient history.
So we're talking about a hidden history here, a civilization that's been overlooked or maybe even, deliberately downplayed?
That's what Houston is arguing. It's a pretty radical idea, and it definitely challenges the traditional narrative.
Okay, so where do we even start unraveling this mystery? Give me a thread to pull on.
Well, Houston begins with Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
Yeah, Ethiopia. You know, the region that's often considered like a potential birthplace for humanity itself.
Okay, I see where you're going. It's like ground zero.
Exactly. Even the ancient Greeks believed this. And there are these Hindu texts called the Puranas that suggest Cushites were already in India before they were in Egypt.
Wait, Cushites in India before Egypt? That's throwing a wrench in the timeline.
Right. It suggests their influence was way more widespread and way earlier than most people realize.
Okay, I'm hooked. So Ethiopia is the starting point. But what did these Cushites actually do that was so groundbreaking?
Well, Houston argues they were masters of a lot of things. Like, think about all the animals we rely on today. Cows, sheep, horses. She says the Cushites were the ones who domesticated them.
Oh, wow. So they were laying the groundwork for agriculture as we know it.
Exactly. And that's not all. Crops, too. Wheat, oats, rice. She credits them with cultivating all these staple foods, and she's talking so long ago that we've almost lost track of their wild origins.
It makes you wonder what else we've gotten wrong about the origins of things.
It really does. And here's where it gets really interesting. We're talking about prehistoric times, right? But Houston says there's evidence of the Cushites mastering metalworking, even iron.
Iron. That's pretty advanced for prehistoric times.
I know, right? And she points to some super old Egyptian artifacts as proof.
So she's basically saying the timeline for technological development might be way off.
Exactly. But here's a big question. What about ancient Egypt itself?
Yes. Egypt, the pyramids, the pharaohs, the whole shebang. Hard to imagine them being influenced by anyone, you know?
I know, right? We usually think of them as like the pinnacle of ancient civilization.
So how do they fit into Houston's narrative? Does she just ignore them?
She doesn't ignore them. In fact, she acknowledges how amazing they were. But here's the kicker. She argues that a lot of what we think of as classic Egyptian achievements actually came from the Cushites.
Wait, so she's saying the Egyptians might have learned from the Cushites?
That's exactly what she's saying. She points to things like skull shapes and the fact that Egyptian art kind of declined after the 6th dynasty.
Okay. I can see how that might suggest a shift in power, maybe a period where the Cushites weren't in control.
Right. And there's more. She even says things like circumcision. That practice was actually influenced by Ethiopia.
Fascinating. So she's connecting cultural practices too, not just technology and art.
And get this. There's this story about a priest in Sais. He's talking to this Greek philosopher named Solon. And he basically tells him that the Greeks are like total newbies compared to the Egyptians. He says the Egyptians have 9,000 years of history recorded in their sacred books.
9,000 years. That's almost impossible to grasp.
I know, right? It makes you wonder what else is out there, hidden in plain sight.
Speaking of hidden, where else does this Cushite trail lead? I'm ready for more.
Okay, get ready for a detour because Houston takes us to a pretty unexpected place. Arabia.
Arabia, like deserts and camels.
Yep, that Arabia. But Houston wants us to forget that stereotypical image. She says we need to see Arabia as this vibrant part of this ancient Cushite empire.
So it wasn't just endless sand dunes back then.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
And here's a bold claim. She says the original Arabian civilization wasn't Semitic at all.
Whoa, wait. Arabia wasn't Semitic. That seems like a pretty big statement to make.
It is. So how does she back that up? Well, she describes two different types of Arabians. You got the Cushites, who she says were builders and creators. They built complex infrastructure like the Great Dam at Mareb.
Okay, so they were the engineers and architects. What about the other group?
The other group, the Semitic Arabs, she says they were more nomadic and warlike, coming into the region much later than the Cushites.
It's amazing how she's painting this picture of two very distinct cultures.
It really challenges our preconceived notions, doesn't it?
It totally does. So we've got Ethiopia, Egypt, and Arabia. Where does this Cushite journey take us next?
Well, buckle up, because we're about to head to a region shrouded in mystery and ancient grandeur, Chaldea and Babylonia.
Ooh, Babylonia. The Hanging Gardens, the Tower of Babel. That's some serious ancient history.
It is. So what does Houston have to say about it?
Well, get this. She argues that Chaldea, like in its earliest form, was a distinctly Cushite civilization, separate from the later Semitic influences that came in.
So like a precursor to the Babylonia we know from the history books.
Exactly. And she goes even further. She suggests that the Kassite invaders, who a lot of people link to those biblical Chaldeans, were also Cushite. She thinks they might have migrated from the Caucasus region.
That's a connection I never would have made. Are we just supposed to take her word for it? What kind of evidence does she offer to support all of this?
Well, when it comes to Babylonia, Houston really emphasizes how advanced their civilization was. We're talking astronomy, a calendar system that we still use today, sophisticated math, huge libraries, incredibly intricate textiles and crafts.
Okay, yeah, those are definitely hallmarks of a complex civilization.
Yeah.
But isn't that what we usually associate with the Babylonians, not necessarily the Cushites?
I know, it's a bit of a mind bender, right? But here's the kicker. Archaeologists actually found a Babylonian lens.
A lens, like for glasses.
Not exactly. Get this. They think it might have been part of a telescope.
Wait, are you serious? Telescopes in ancient Babylonia? That's insane.
It is, and it just goes to show how Houston is pulling together these seemingly random clues to build her case for this vast, interconnected Cushite empire.
It's like a historical detective story.
Totally. So are you ready for the next stop on this Cushite adventure?
Lead the way.
Okay, get ready for another twist, because Houston's next destination is India.
India. Wait, the land of ancient wisdom and vibrant culture. India had Cushites.
That's what Houston's arguing. And it's about to get really interesting.
Okay, India. Already a place bursting with history and culture. So how do the Cushites fit into all of this? What's the connection Houston's making?
Well, she's suggesting that the original Hindu civilization, the one that came before all the stuff we usually learn about, was actually Cushite.
Whoa, hold on. So she's saying the Cushites were in India shaping things even before the Aryans came along. That's a pretty wild idea.
It is. And to support this, she points to the fact that ancient India had these aristocratic republics, which she says aligns with the Cushite way of governing.
Okay, so like a different social structure, maybe a more egalitarian system before the whole caste system that we know today.
Exactly. It's like she's suggesting a completely different foundation for Indian society.
So she's turning a lot of what we think we know about India on its head.
She is. And she even goes so far as to say that the Aryan invasions, the ones that are usually credited with bringing the Vedas and shaping Hinduism, were actually pretty late development in India's history.
Wait, so the Aryans, the ones who brought so much of what we consider foundational to Hinduism, they were late to the party.
That's what Houston's arguing. Imagine that, right? This whole civilization flourishing in India long before the Aryans showed up.
It's mind-blowing. But India is huge. Is she saying the Cushites were all over the subcontinent? Like, what evidence does she have for this?
She highlights a couple of things. First, she points to the incredible diversity of plants and animals in India. She sees that as evidence of sophisticated agricultural practices that go way back.
Okay, so like a long tradition of farming and agriculture that predates the Aryans.
Right. And then there are the Dravidians, who she sees as potential descendants of these original Cushites. They have their own distinct languages and customs, separate from the later Aryan influences.
So it's like a cultural lineage that survived for centuries, even after all these other groups came in.
Exactly. But it's not just about culture and language. There's some tantalizing archaeological evidence, too. Houston mentions this city called Mavalapurian.
Mavalapurian.
It's a city that's partially submerged in the sea. And get this. It's carved from solid rock.
Wait, a submerged city carved from rock? That sounds like something out of a myth.
I know. It suggests that it's incredibly old, potentially predating the Aryans, and that whoever built it had some serious engineering skills.
Okay, that's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
A submerged city. You can't just ignore something like that.
Exactly. And there's more. Indian messengers back in 100 CE claimed that their civilization was already 6,000 years old at that point.
6,000 years. That's blowing all the timelines out of the water.
Right. It makes you wonder how much more we've yet to uncover, how much history is still buried beneath the surface.
It's both exciting and humbling at the same time.
Absolutely. But hold on to your hat because we're not done with the Cushites just yet. Houston takes us to one last region that might surprise you.
Ooh. Okay, hit me with it. Where are we headed?
Media and Persia.
Media and Persia. Now we're talking about the big leagues of ancient history. Cyrus the Great, Darius, these were empires that spanned vast territories.
Exactly. And Houston is throwing a curveball by saying that they were also part of this ancient Cushite domain. She even suggests that Zoroastrianism, the religion founded by the prophet Zoroaster, might have had Cushite origins.
Okay, wait a minute. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's major religions, potentially with roots in this Cushite empire. My mind is officially blown.
I know, right? But here's the thing. Persian history is notoriously complex and full of conflicting accounts.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about timelines and who influenced who. It can be a real headache trying to sort it all out.
That's why Houston's argument is so interesting. She's not afraid to dive into those murky waters and point out the contradictions and uncertainties. For example, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the Magi.
The Magi, like the wise men who visited baby Jesus in the Christmas story.
Yes, those Magi. They were these enigmatic priestly figures in ancient Persia. And there's a lot of debate about their origins. Were they part of the old Cushite race, or were they later invaders?
So even within Persia itself, there are these competing narratives, these questions that challenge the accepted version of history.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how much we still don't know about the past, and how much room there is for reinterpreting things based on new evidence and fresh perspectives.
It's almost like a giant puzzle with missing pieces, and every new discovery helps us fill in a little bit more of the picture.
That's a great analogy, and Houston isn't afraid to acknowledge those missing pieces, those gaps in our knowledge. In fact, she sees them as opportunities to question assumptions and explore alternative interpretations.
So instead of clinging to the old narratives, she's saying we should be open to the possibility that there's more to the story than we've been told.
Exactly, and that's what makes her book so thought-provoking. She's not just presenting a different version of history, she's challenging us to think differently about history itself.
It's a good reminder. The history isn't static. It's not set in stone. It's constantly being reshaped and reinterpreted as we uncover new evidence and ask new questions.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so endlessly fascinating.
It truly is. Okay, so we've journeyed with Houston through this vast and fascinating landscape of the ancient world, exploring her claims about the Cushite Empire's influence. It's been a wild ride.
It has. And while it's important to remember that Houston's book is just one perspective on a very complex history, it's definitely given us a lot to think about.
No doubt about it. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on the big picture here. What are we supposed to take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing we can learn from Houston's work is the importance of humility. We need to be humble enough to admit that we don't have all the answers, that our understanding of history is constantly evolving.
Humility and a healthy dose of curiosity. That's what drives us to learn, to explore, and to uncover those hidden truths buried beneath the surface of history.
Well said. And who knows what other mysteries and forgotten narratives are waiting to be unearthed.
That's what makes it so exciting. Every new discovery has the potential to reshape our understanding of the past and shed new light on the world we live in today.
So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of history.
I love that. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Drusilla Dunjee Houston's Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire. It's been a journey full of surprises, challenges, and some seriously mind-blowing insights. Remember to keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, who gets to decide what history is?
Right. Whose voices get heard and whose stories get lost along the way.
Exactly. It's about power, isn't it? The power to control the narrative.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Houston's work so important.
It really highlights how crucial it is to seek out different perspectives, to challenge those accepted versions of history that we often take for granted.
Like she's saying, hey, don't just believe everything you've been told. Dig a little deeper, ask some tough questions, and be open to the idea that there might be a whole lot more to the story.
Exactly. That's what true intellectual curiosity is all about. Always questioning, always exploring, always trying to expand our understanding of the world and how we fit into it.
Absolutely. So as we step back from this deep dive into the ancient world of the Cushites, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listener will hold on to?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing we can learn from Houston's work is the importance of humility.
Humility.
Yeah, humility. We have to be humble enough to admit that we don't have all the answers, that our understanding of history is always changing, always evolving as we learn more.
So humility and a healthy dose of curiosity too, right? That's what drives us to learn, to explore, and to uncover those hidden truths that are just waiting to be found.
Well said. And who knows what other mysteries and forgotten narratives are still out there.
That's what's so exciting. Every new discovery has the potential to change everything we thought we knew about the past and give us a whole new perspective on the world we live in today.
It's true. It's a never-ending journey of exploration and discovery.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Drusilla Dunjee Houston's Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, full of surprises, challenges, and some seriously mind-blowing insights. We've traveled from Ethiopia to Egypt, Arabia, Babylonia, India, and even Persia, all in search of this lost Cushite empire.
It makes you wonder what other empires and civilizations are out there just waiting to be rediscovered.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, history is full of surprises, and that's what makes it so much fun to explore. So, to our listeners out there, keep those minds curious, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.